Hi everyone, I'm Kayla. In this video we're going to talk about length and diameter. In my last video I talked about gauge, so if you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch that one as well. Something I didn't mention in the last video is that not everybody uses gauge. Some manufacturers, retailers, they use millimeters instead of gauge. So we're going to start off with talking about length and diameter, and I'm going to define length, which is a measurement of something from end to end. And I have an example here of a barbell. Here's the piece of jewelry. We have a piece here that's a straight barbell and it has two balls on the end. And when we're measuring the length, we're measuring the length of the actual barbell, not including the balls. Here's one that's deconstructed. It's just the barbell length. And some people refer to this length as the wearable size. So when you're wearing the piece, you're wearing this. Your body part is filling this area in, and it's not including the balls on the end. And then I don't have a hoop with me, but here's a picture. When we're talking about diameter, we're talking about a straight line that is passing from side to side through the center of the circle or sphere. And we're not measuring the actual circle, but the inside part of it. So I will show you a side-by-side of a 14 gauge and a 0 gauge hoop, which both have the diameter of a 5/8. And you can see the center of the hoop is the same on both pieces, but the 0 gauge looks much bigger because it has a really thick gauge all the way around. And this is also kind of the wearable size because you want your body to fit around the hoop, or you want the hoop to fit around your body. I guess that'd be a better way to say it. So both of these are a measure of distance. When we're measuring length and diameter, we use both fractions in the imperial system, which is an older system, and millimeters in the metric system, which is a newer system. It really depends on where you're located and what the people around you are using to measure these pieces. They're both kind of interchangeable. You can say this piece is 3/8 or 10 millimeters. It's the same length, or roughly the same length, and they mean sort of the same thing. And the reason why we want to measure the inside of the piece of jewelry is because we want this piece of jewelry to fit around the body. If we're talking about the nostril piercing, we want the jewelry to fit through the actual piercing and fit around the nostril. Maybe I'll draw like an example or something. This is a terrible drawing, I'm sorry.
Okay, voiceover time. So I was really bad at articulating what was happening here, but what is happening is that I'm showing you a nostril with the piercing, and you measure from that piercing to the edge of the nostril. That's going to be the diameter. So this green is the piercing, and the blue marks the diameter from the piercing to the edge of the nostril. And now I'm showing you a hoop that fits from the piercing around the nostril. So you see the hoop going through the nostril piercing and around the edge of the nose. And this is the proper way to measure a hoop. When you hold it up to somebody's nose, you want it to go through that piercing and around the edge of their nostril. You can have the hoop a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, the loose you want the hoop to fit. But if you measure it too small, then you have the problem where the hoop is too small and it's not going to fit around the edge of the nostril. If you try to put it into the piercing, it's actually going to hit the side of the nose. Or if you put it up against the side of the nose, it doesn't actually reach the nostril piercing. So that's what that was, and I hope that this helped.
If you guys have any questions, let me know. I hope that kind of explained why we use the inside diameter and not the outside. Now we're gonna talk about plugs, or stretched piercings, I guess. Doesn't really matter where. So the gauge of it would be considered the diameter. So it's around this way from end to end is the diameter, which is the gauge of a piece of jewelry. And you can use either gauge, fraction, or millimeter to measure how big this is. Some people use millimeter instead of gauge. And then on the side of it, see, this is the front. This would be the length of it from end to end, from front to back. That is the wearable size, and that would be the length. And it has a dip in here because the outside is a bigger diameter than the inside. This is the actual gauge, which is a 0, and then the outside is a double 0. That just helps it fit into the ear. Little tips about I will definitely be making a stretching video. I think I mentioned this in the last video, and that will include both gauge and length and diameter when I do talk about it. So this is kind of like the baby steps of talking about that as well. The next thing is gem pieces and balls. Like I mentioned earlier, I like to do gauge as in the thickness of the jewelry, fraction imperial system for the length of it, and then the metric system for identifying the size of gem pieces and balls.
Okay, time for another voiceover. So here I have some end pieces. This is a ball and a sphere, so it's going to be the same size from the side view as the bird's eye view. And then I have a gem piece, which has a shorter rise than the bird's eye view. When we're measuring the ball, obviously we're measuring from end to end, and this ball is a 5mm. And then on the gem, we only measure the bird's eye view, which is a 6mm.
Hopefully that makes sense. I guess this kind of gets confusing, but it's all kind of self-explanatory. When you look at a piece and you say how big it is, it's either 2, 3, 4, 5mm. And some companies do use fractions, so it would be 1/8 of an inch, really tiny, and then 5/32 would be a little bit bigger. If you look at a ruler or something, you can kind of get an idea of how big those would be. I personally just find it easier. I use specific measurements for specific parts of a piece of jewelry. And then somebody brought up length on industrial piercing. So they were asking if it depends on how the ear anatomy works or what the length needs to be to go across the ear. And yeah, that really depends on the anatomy. And in general, when we're doing initial piercing, we kind of get an idea of how much we need for swelling in the area. It depends on what geographical location we're in, on how much people are going to swell or if they're not going to swell at all. We take a look at their anatomy, see how big their ear is. We kind of measure it, and then I'll hold that up to a piece of jewelry or a couple pieces and see what length I need to go to. And that will tell me, you know, it's 1.5 inches maybe. And I use the imperial system, like I said, on length. So it really does depend on the anatomy. Like when I'm doing nostrils, it really depends on how thick the nostril is. I'll do either 1/4 inch length or a 5/16, which is a size up to put in that nostril there. So this diameter is going to be different from the diameter that's the actual thickness of the nostril. So if you're wearing a stud here, it's going to be a lot smaller from the outside of the nose to the inside of the nose, rather than the distance here is a lot longer. When we're piercing somebody, we kind of have to have an idea. If they want to do a hoop later in future, then we have to kind of place it in a spot that will accommodate a hoop, right? So we'll start out with one size here, and then we'll switch to a different size as far as the hoop. Hopefully that makes sense as well. All right, that's all I have for length and diameter. I think I covered everything that I needed to. It's pretty self-explanatory. It might take a little bit of getting used to when you're first starting to understand pieces, but if you're looking at jewelry, you'll see a lot of the sizes reoccurring. To be honest, I'm not the greatest at math. I'm not a mathematician, and I never thought I would be working with millimeters, fractions, lengths, diameters, anything like that when I got into body piercing. So it took some work getting used to. It sticks when it's reoccurring. So if you are looking at jewelry, you'll notice that there's specific numbers or lengths, sizes, things like that. You'll notice that there's sizes reoccurring in the piercing world, for lack of a better term, I guess. But yeah, and then you'll just get used to that. We'll talk more about this when I discuss gauges and stretching. But as far as now, I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Hopefully I was clear enough, but if you do have questions, let me know. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.